Dude, the amount of people that listen to this podcast that I did not think of just blew my
Yeah.
socks off. Dude, it's crazy.
Well, I
After
mean, we'll
last
start.
week,
Yeah, I was gonna say we'll start right there. Did you get a bunch of personal messages and emails after last
yeah,
week's
dude.
episode?
Everyone's like, yeah, I saw it in the C-Suite Unfiltered. I'm like, dude, there's like less than 1,000 people that watch this, but somehow like everyone that I know does. Goodness
Yeah,
gracious.
well, loyal fan base or loyal friends, which is better, you know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Uh,
awesome. Well, yeah, welcome back. Another episode, C-Suite Unfiltered with Mike Andes. Big episode last week. This week we're gonna maybe take a different turn. We went kind of more personal last week. Wins and losses from 2024, expected must wins, can't loses for 2025. Now I want to talk about something completely different, and I don't know if this is necessarily something that you are doing intentionally, but I read this very interesting article. This is from a newsletter that I recently subscribed to from Scott Galloway, or Prof G, if you will. And this is actually by his producer on his or co-host and producer on his podcast, Prof G Markets. So the gentleman who wrote this, Ed Ellison, 25-year-old, who works with Scott Galloway, and the title of the article is "People Are the New Brands." So, do you want me to just dive right into what this article is about?
let's do it.
All right, perfect. So, there's some numbers from this article. The first number that I thought was interesting, and basically the premise of the article is that the nowadays modern society, and specifically because the writer of this article is technically a Gen Zer, that Gen Z is trending towards less trust in brands overall compared to their boomer counterparts, if you will, that still have high trust in brands, and specifically, very traditional American Western brands. But here's one of the numbers that pops out right at the beginning of the article, and this is part of the reasoning behind this distrust in brand, is that Gen Zs spend an average, and if you want to guess, an average blank number of days per year looking at a screen. How many days per year does Gen Z look at a screen?
I would say
And
a
this is like
minimum.
accumulating all the minutes and hours they're spending looking at screens. What does
Yeah,
that equal in days?
I'm gonna
Not days,
go.
because it's every day, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with like between 70 and 80 days a year.
Yeah, you're actually low. It's on average,
What?
109 days per year is spent looking at a screen. On
24
average,
hours? Like 24 hours? Times like
yeah,
times 24 hours? Wow.
yes. Yeah, 109 days per year looking at a screen. On average in the US, people spend between 106 to 125 days asleep. So they are looking at screens an equal amount of time as they are sleeping.
That would mean that everyone has on average like 8 hours of sleep a night. Is that true?
Well, that's a generalization about the sleeping. Like,
Oh,
that's what I'm generalizing about the sleeping, but I'm just
got
giving
it.
like a comparable number. Like,
Okay.
typically they say, right, you spend a third of your life asleep, right? So a third of the year, right, would be 100 to 150 days, somewhere in that range. So I'm just generalizing, but this is a data-driven statistic here in this article, that Gen Z spends an average of 109 days per year looking at a screen. 80% of our waking hours are spent consuming information. That's up from 40% in 1980. We see 208 ads per hour, 10 times more than our parents ever did. As a result, we are more anxious, distracted, and depressed than any other generation in history. And we
Let's go.
all know this, but we do not comprehend it. Like frogs in boiling water, we've been slow cooked by screens. So, what are your initial reactions to the drastic amount of screen time that future generations are going to have just because screens are so easily accessible today?
What are we gonna do about it, dude? Like,
Yeah.
you got to survive, and you're gonna make your money now behind a screen. You're not gonna make it out in the field planting potatoes. You're
Mhm.
gonna make it behind a screen that does manufactures and plows the field and makes 1,000 to 2,000 times more productivity than you were by yourself. And so, unless you want to go back to the old way of doing things, get used to it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So this is where it gets interesting, and where the article takes a little bit of a little bit of a turn here. The most important number here that he wants to share is 12%. That's the share of Americans who say they have zero close friends. 12% of Americans say they have no close friends. That's up from 3% since 1990. So in 35 years, we 4x'd the loneliness in the country, if you will. And it says half the country says in open surveys and polls, this is lots of different data from U.S. Bureau of Statistics and a bunch of other ones. But they say that half of the country is struggling with loneliness. I don't know necessarily what the definition of that is, but that is, a statistic that was measured. And we now spend 70% less time with our friends than we did a decade ago. So we are we are
Okay.
lonely.
Well, we assume also that having more friends correlates to being less lonely, and I would
Mhm,
argue that point. There are plenty of times and instances where there are people with many friends that are still very lonely, and it's actually more
mhm,
debilitating because you are in a crowd of people and still feel that way.
mhm,
And so as you age, you usually have less acquaintances and less friends, and you
mhm,
usually spend more and more time with your spouse, and maybe a circle of 2 or 3 people. Um, and so, it's not. I'm not like I'm not being like against having friends. It's just a matter of like I think this is a reality, and
mhm.
what are we gonna do about it? What are we gonna do? Like force people to be friends? Like
Yeah.
we all have shallow relationships because of social media, where we have thousands of friends that we literally
Mhm,
have never even met before. So yes, there's a widening of the social kind of graph, but then the depth is lost in many
mhm.
regards. And so, what do you do about it? Go find, if you really need close friends, go find 2 or 3 and like invest time, energy, and resources into cultivating those relationships. And
Mhm.
if you don't need friends, that's fine too. Like, you do you.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the kind of the meat of the article here. He's kind of setting the stage of, okay, like people are lonely. Why? Essentially, like we can see statistics where people have less friends, less human interaction, more screen time. Screens are negatively impacting our society. That's kind of just like a general presumption to this article I'm summarizing here. But he says that it ultimately is focused on this word and this new definition called parasocial. So I don't know. Have you heard of this term at all?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So and this is where maybe it's a little bit more in your wheelhouse, as you would technically fall into the definition of a social media influencer. And I'm going to read here a little bit. Feel free to cut me off, but this is kind of the meat of the article. The technical term for this phenomenon is parasocial relationships. Per tech and science, a relationship a person imagines having with another person whom they do not actually know. Parasocial is mostly used in reference to Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, but I believe parasocial relationships affect everything. If I had to describe 2024 in a word, it would be parasocial. This is evident in my industry, podcasting. Joe Rogan has become more influential than the world's largest news network. His podcast gets 3x more downloads than the average primetime viewership of CNN, MSNBC combined. Many have diagnosed this with tectonic shift of left versus right phenomenon. However, in the context of loneliness, this is a red herring. He said the key distinction between CNN and Joe Rogan is that one is a brand, the other is a person. One is CNN versus Joe Rogan. One is red letters. One is a face. One is news. One is a conversation. And that's where it's kind of inviting more people in, basically, to the conversation, to that human interaction with Joe. And that's why he's grown, is because of these kind of parasocial relationships. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, like I think it comes to any form of selling. Like you gotta know, like, and trust the person. And so, when CNN and these other brands do things that are against someone's trust, you're gonna lose brand equity. And so the thing about a brand is it's very difficult to actually apologize when you've made a mistake, because like if you're reporting on news, if you're giving information, if you're creating products and services, you're going to make mistakes. How you handle those is whether or not the brand becomes human. And
Mm-hmm.
so, someone like Joe, for example, has changed his opinions on things. He gives ideas about things. He says he's wrong about things. Whereas if you're a buttoned down version of a brand that can't say you're wrong, you become dehumanized, and therefore the trust factor decreases. And so, I actually think that, like, whether it be a brand or a person, like if you want to ask yourself, like, your personal relationships, like, how do you know to trust someone? It's like, well, when they made a mistake, what did they do about it? And so if your personal brand, like when I say personal brand, think more like your personal relationships, is when people think about you making a mistake, they just know you'll sweep it under the rug, you'll stand up for yourself, you'll make stuff up, you cannot, go against your own thoughts. Like, your thoughts are the epitome, and you can't kind of steel man your own arguments, then you're going to lose credibility. You're going to lose trust when you say have a POV. And so the reason that someone would trust someone more like Joe or a podcast or someone that has a social media influence is because usually they will be more honest about their wins and losses, and the track record is much more clear, and they don't try to cover things up. So that trust factor of knowing, liking, and trusting someone is, in the past, knowing has been the biggest part. So because you had because you had a mass media, you had a cable news network, you had a big brand like CNN or whatever, because you had the knowing part, everyone knew you. But the parts that has eroded is the trust and the liking part. And so as those erode, the knowing becomes less and less valuable. And so even though someone like Joe Rogan, less people know him in relation to the number of people who know CNN. However, the liking and the trusting part are increased, even though knowing is far below the other brands, simply due to the fact that he is willing to admit when he makes a mistake, and he's willing to alter and change his perspectives. And that's more of a humanistic thing that we can affiliate with, because we all make mistakes. How you handle those will determine whether or not you are a corporate, quote unquote, brand, or someone that's personal and that can create a relationship with you, and that will create a paranormal, parasocial relationship with someone, because they are now a human. We don't create that same affiliation or connection with a brand like CNN, because they don't show when they make mistakes. They don't deal with those in a way that we can trust them on.
That's interesting. Do you feel like, I guess the way you're explaining it, it's almost like the desire for more human connection has made us less connected to other humans, because we view seeing humans through a screen now, through our phones, through podcasts, instead of the actual human interaction in person. Now, what's the balance between, like, we desire the knowledge from, influencers, from a Joe Rogan, from whoever maybe you and I like to listen to the All In podcast, right? Very successful entrepreneurs. We desire that information. Do I feel like they're my friends? Personally, no. I feel like they are entertaining and they're educational. But what is the line between, well, those guys are so cool and I want to be like them and I want to connect with them, they're my online friends, versus, like, I just have friends in real life? Is it the fact that because they have so much more knowledge, they're more entertaining, I would rather isolate myself to be involved in that relationship versus seeking out in-person relationships? Like, what's the balance that needs to be struck there?
I think people will just gravitate to whichever one serves them the most. If having someone in person and having a physical connection with someone, belly to belly, eyeball to eyeball, is going to be more beneficial to you, you'll do that. If talking to someone that, like, you and I would never be able to talk to billionaires in the past or hear from them and pick their brain, etc. So, like, in my opinion, this is not a matter of good and bad. This is a matter of you have options. And so it so happens that hearing from billionaires is a lot more fascinating to me than, like, going and talking to my high school friends. And so now I have the option. So if someone's going to judge me based upon the fact that, like, oh, we're not having more in-person connection because of screens, yeah, I'm thrilled, because I'd rather talk to these people and hear from them than this other people that I really have no connection with whatsoever, but simply because they're, a physical human body that I can go talk to. Does that really make the connection any better? Does that make my information that I gain from them or the knowledge I gain from them any better? I don't believe so. And so there will always be people crying, how horrible this is, but, like, then they don't strip back the fact that, like, we have access to information with the freedom and movement of information, news, as well as the access to be able to move up inside of a socioeconomic ladder because of access to relationships that you would never have the ability to have in the past. I think that's underrated. There's no way in the world I'd be able to done what I've done without having the ability to be able to connect to people that in 30, 40 years ago would have been completely inaccessible, or would have been filtered through a social media or through a news network. And so to be able to have connection with those people now is the thing that is a huge unlock. And so to say that all relationships now are somehow discredited or less than because they are not belly to belly, I think is very much a head in the sand situation. And yes, there are downstream effects of people that use these relationships digitally in a way that's not productive or not beneficial, building them up. And there's a lot of negative things around, whether it be OnlyFans and other situations where people get involved in. And I certainly see that argument, but I cannot fully discredit these relationships because it's what's made it possible for me to go from the bottom to higher up. And I think it is the is the freedom of information using social media that allows the person that wants to get ahead, and that's what makes America great. And this technology, in my opinion, is a huge medium for success.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And this is where like I don't want, I don't want our podcast to get like fully like Socratic, but like do we agree on the premise that in-person friends are important? Like do we agree on that premise?
For some people,
But what about for you? Like do you think that okay, holistically, do you think on the average it is important for
yes.
people to have real life friendships? Great.
Yes.
So then the question, okay, I just want to make sure we agree on the premise, which I figured, but I want people to understand like this, like let's get down to, first principles thinking about social interaction. Like, do we agree that having in-person friendships is valuable? Okay, great. We do. Now, what's the tipping point? Is it, do I need one friend that I see once a year, but then all the rest of my friends are online through parasocial relationships? Or is it like everyone must self-regulate that? But what this article is kind of arguing is like, we are becoming more lonely, we're becoming more isolated, and that is not a good thing. That's kind of what this article is arguing at the beginning, and I want to get into the second half of the article, but what are your thoughts on that? Like, is there a proverbial tipping point, or does everybody have to check themselves? Are there communities that you would recommend? Like, what does that look like?
I think if people find that they have a lack in this area and they this sort of thing enrages them, then they can probably take action steps in their personal life to ensure that they have more in-person interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Join a church, go to a gym, eat out more often, talk to people, put yourself through courses around like communicating with strangers, put yourself in communities like Toastmasters, etc. Go to conferences, go to get inside of communities. Like, this is not difficult, and so for someone to cry about how bad it is, I just think there's more opportunity to have in-person connection than ever before because of the digital space. Because now you can go onto meetups, you can find communities online, and then that many times will go in person. And so I think this is many times a choice that people make, and they will blame technology when in reality they do not have the skills to go out and get the in-person connections required for them to be quote happy. So I take a very pro technology stance because, like, over the course of history, it has proven to continue in that direction.
Yeah.
So if you want to cry about it and try to go opposite, like, having social media cleanses, great. Why not just like unfollow everyone? Like, why not just
Mhm.
cleanse you, like focus on the root source here. Like, I'm not opposed to social media cleanses, etc. Like, I think it is healthy, but if someone's addicted to it, or like you feel like it's taking away from you, clean it up. Like, instead
Mhm.
of just being like, I'm just gonna cap everything. Do you think that social media is going away? Do you think you're gonna be able to build a
Mhm.
business without it? Do you think you're able to get away from screens, like go the opposite direction? Like, newsflash, no, you aren't.
Mhm.
And so instead of trying to just band-aid everything by saying we should take away screens, we should take away social media, why not fix the root of the problem, which is like, okay, can I redo my news feeds where I only follow one or two people or three or four people, my close quote
Mhm.
unquote friends? Like, put a cap on how many people you can follow on social media, and then see how your friendships do. You'll probably have way more connection because you'll see what they're doing every day instead of your
Mhm.
5,000 friends that Facebook has to figure out in their algorithm of which ones they're going to present to you. And then you'll feel overwhelmed by all these very surface relationships. So, like, people that cry on this, like, I just like, hey,
Yeah.
look, there's so
Yeah.
many opportunities for in-person connection. You're like, well, I just don't know what to do on the weekend. Go join a church. Go join a church. Go to a mission. Go donate your time and help someone else in need. That's just many times my kind of comeback on this.
Yeah, yeah. And this article is not necessarily arguing against screens, if you will. It's just saying it's highlighting trends that it sees, and ultimately, like what we're working towards here. We're gonna get in the weeds, which I love, but it's moving towards like why are people the new brands versus branding having this trust that it used to have in the Western marketplaces. So one thing, kind of moving back to the article here, this section of the article was great. It's called Geo Person, and basically he's using the case to which Trump got elected as like the perfect example of branding versus a person. And the brand that Kamala Harris put out there was the traditional Democrat brand, if you will. But everything was scripted, everything was staged, everything was exactly the way it should have been in theory for the Democrat brand. Whereas Trump literally hired multiple people to tweet his exact thoughts in every single moment of watch watching a Kamala Harris speech, watching a CNN news anchor talk negatively about him, right? He had multiple people that followed him 24/7 to get his thoughts out there. And there are these, like, I don't know if they intentionally released them or leaked videos, but he references one where he was watching Kamala do a big speech at a rally, and he's like, oh, this is good, tweet that, oh, you should say this, right? And it's just like, it is him. And this article is basically arguing that whatever you want to call it Trump's narcissism, call it his genius, like wherever you stand, doesn't matter. Like, he built a brand that people could identify with, and that the American people who were kind of actively disassociating with the Republican brand have now become parasocial or attached to their friendship with Trump. And I think that that's an interesting kind of take. There are so many layers to an election, but basically he's arguing that the person won the election, not the brand of the Democratic Party. What do you think that that's kind of what you've seen, or post-election, what is a reality?
Yeah, this is why if you go back, maybe you can clip this out where the pod right after the assassination attempt, I said he's won.
And then once he stood up and he did the whole like fist thing, I was like, okay, like now it's going to be so clear in terms of who's stronger. This is probably going to swing the election. Mm-hmm. And so if it doesn't do that, I would be amazed. Mm-hmm. And so from a political standpoint, that was probably the best thing that could ever happen to him.
Because like it just humanized him. And so, politicians have always tried to humanize it, but usually it's using words. Something like that is unscripted, and people like unscripted things. And this is why actually, like, I will always make sure that there's some level of Q&A at a conference, because someone could have wrote my script, someone could have wrote my slides, someone could have put all that together. But you ask a Q&A, and like you actually get to see how someone operates when they ask a hard question or they say something negative about you. Like those are actually the telling factors as to whether or not someone has the goods. And so like in that moment, for millions of people to see, that's what was exemplified, the personality and the brand, and that's unscripted and you can't manufacture it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's where this article then turns. He's highlighting the election as an example. It's obviously forefront of our mind, but he also went to the comparison of advertising dollars spent per car sold across all brands. If you look at General Motors, if you look at Ford, if you look at Volkswagen, it averages between $450 to $600 per car sold. This is a 2023 data to Tesla's 4. And he's arguing about how Elon is the marketing campaign for Tesla, right? He puts himself out there. Tesla has a 10x greater value than its peers, and this article highlights those in just the EV space specifically. And he said it's primarily because of Elon Musk, that he has just driven the results of the company because people trust him. They like him. They see his tweets. They don't care what Tesla's marketing company is doing. They just want to know, is this guy crazy, or is he a genius, or is he both?
Yeah, like I've said before, like Tesla's the biggest creator-led business in the world.
Yeah.
And it continues to be that way. Like the vast majority of the stock is owned by individual investors. It's the number one traded stock by private investors. And it is the brand of Elon. So, whether like that, there's pros and cons to that, right? So like, for example, when he takes a stance politically, it is going to, half the country will be against that. But again, traditionally, even if someone goes against your core values, if they are authentic to who they are, most of the time in the long run, we tend to identify with that more. Because we just want to see people be authentic. And so when they're buttoned down and they say what the corporate speak is, we just don't like it. And I think that's becoming more and more evident as social media has become a bigger part of our life, because we get to see the behind the scenes. We get to see Trump say that sort of stuff inside of a back office that we would never have seen 10, 15 years ago. And so as that becomes more and more evident, what used to be the skeletons in the closet are now just being displayed for everyone to see. And some of the skeletons are great. You actually get to see how someone's brain works. You get to see their ingenuity, their smarts. What we would never have seen in the past is now becoming out in the front. And so I think it's really positive. I just think it's really good. So
yeah. And then so the article is talking about our advertising dollars per car sold in the automotive industry, and then it pivots here, and I want to read this section. That's probably the last I read verbatim from the article, but it's very funny. He said, Meta was one of the worst rebrands that happened in 3 years ago when the company tried to wash away the sins of Facebook to Meta. It didn't work. The brand trust tanked. Its best rebrand, however, came earlier this year. This article was written right before the end of 2024, when Mark Zuckerberg himself went from awkward coat and tie wearing Senate hearing prop to gold chain donning, T-Pain loving jiu-jitsu fighter. In addition to leaning into his personality, Zuckerberg has made himself more public. He posted 71 times on Instagram this year, from everything to Taylor Swift concerts to UFC fights, whereas in 2021 he posted 29 times, and the overwhelming majority of his posts were product announcements. So he's even saying, like, Facebook tried to do a rebrand over to Meta. It tanked. If you look at the data, if you look at consumer response to that brand transition, it was horrible, and that's why Meta isn't even really even talked about much anymore. But Mark Zuckerberg's personal rebrand has been massive, not only for his following, but engagement and like customer satisfaction with Facebook and Meta products. So I thought that was very interesting too, to see just a very clear kind of line in the sand. Like the brand transition didn't work, but the personal transition did work for Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, yeah, even like to this day, we still think of Steve Jobs as like the founder of Apple, and even though he's been dead for years, it's just like it's still inbred as the personal brand of Apple, and the legacy continues on. And so I think the idea of having a personal brand being an Achilles heel of a larger company has been kind of ingrained from private equity and, you know, can you sell your business, et cetera. But we're seeing on like the greatest stages of corporate America, and that is like your personal brand can become worth billions and billions of dollars vicariously through a product. And so whether you look at someone like Elon and Mark Zuckerberg, or you look at like someone like acquisition.com with Alex, like these are brands that will become massive, and the companies that they build underneath those personal brands will become the leading companies in the future, and they will be able to do so because they get negative customer acquisition cost, where they're able to run media, they're able to tweet for the and be able to make money on those tweets and that media and that attention, while also driving attention to their products. And that's why Toyota can't, because like when you think about Toyota, who do you think about? You don't think about the founder. There is no origin story that everyone thinks about, unless you're like deep into business philosophy. You think about like, you know, the Toyota production system, et cetera. But like, it doesn't really do at Honda. Like, who even knows what Honda stands for?
Yeah.
But we all know what Tesla stands for, and some people don't like it. But it's because we know. Like, because again, if you know, like, and trust someone, I know what they stand for. I know what the philosophies are. And so it's easiest for a person to be able to be true to their identity because there's only one person. Like, so if you had a conglomerate of 10 people that started Facebook, it'd be very difficult to actually have a brand association because we don't know what they all think. They don't know, the direction is unclear. And so by having a personal brand, you open yourself up you're susceptible to that one individual going in some sort of a direction. So when Mark Zuckerberg is considered as like, you know, a cyborg in front of Senate, like, and becomes a meme, that is negative for the Facebook brand. Although the engineers and the thousands of people working behind it have nothing to do with it. And the same thing is true when Elon goes a certain direction politically or spends money on a certain, or attention on a different business, et cetera. There's going to be negative downstream effects of that. And so, for example, with myself, when we're building Augusta, or building Copilot, or building the media team, the objective of gaining negative customer acquisition costs is the goal. Because if you achieve that, you can infinitely scale. Not infinitely, but you can scale very quickly. Because when you can pay $4 to get someone in your door versus your competition is spending $600, you have won the game. That's when you go raise a ton of money from public markets, and then you just throw cash at it. And that's what these companies are doing. And so I think it's always been looked down on, but like if you actually tear back what Tesla and SpaceX and XAI and all these other companies that Elon is doing, he's simply a content creator. That's all he is.
Yeah.
And he has great people because he has attracted those people because of his content and because of his stances and because of his personal brand. And so I think the same is going to happen over and over and over, and it's going to become more and more common where, you know, whether you look at Jensen Huang from Infinity, he owns 4% of the company, but we all look to him as the head of a $3 trillion company. And then same thing with like Jeff Bezos. The guy he's not the CEO anymore. He spends most of his time vacationing and then working at Amazon doing board related things,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then obviously Blue Origin. But like these are the brands that we actually identify with. When you talk about Amazon, you're like, yeah, I gotta make sure that Jeff Bezos gets the fuel for his yacht. Like we still identify as him as the brand, him as Amazon. And so it's amazing to me, even with when someone like Steve Jobs, I think was actually the first one that was kind of like this, where like there was so much legacy and like brand associated with him, and it carried into Apple. And what's cool is somehow that has stayed inside the culture of the company. Whether or not there's been innovation, you can argue all that sort of thing, but like it's there, like it's tangible. You talk about it. It's when you think of Apple, you think about Steve Jobs, and I think it's a really cool brand association and something I look at because like as we grow the companies, I've always been like, maybe I shouldn't be the front facing. I should be less. It's like, look, if Elon can build trillions of dollars of value and do all these crazy things, and he is literally running a personal brand, I think we're okay. So.
Yeah. What do you think that does, kind of zooming out, I guess, to more of the macro of the situation? What does that do to the overall view or sentiment towards capitalism? Because I think now we're at an interesting crux, right? People joke or dig like, oh, gotta buy this water bottle on Amazon, right? Gotta put the fuel in Jeff Bezos's yacht. Well, that's kind of an anti-capitalistic nature. But maybe for someone like yourself, as you're growing and scaling, it actually has some pros where people do want to support you. Maybe they're more willing to pay you a subscription fee or whatever it is. Maybe they're going to cheer a little bit louder when you have a success, because in the grand scheme of capitalism, you're still a very small fish. But then where's the tipping point for you to be now Mike's a big fish and I don't like him and that's not cool and he makes too much money? Like, do you see what I'm getting at there? Like, what is the sentiment towards capitalism when there isn't like a brand? It's like, okay, there's Ford. Like Ford, they make trucks and hopefully they're profitable because they give thousands of Americans jobs. Good. I'm okay with that. But like Mike Andes, he makes too much money and I don't like that.
Yeah, so I've watched this actually last several years as, obviously we're trying to grow my personal brands. Like, what's the perception around this? So how do you guard this from happening is you don't change your stance. And so the reason that people change their mindset on someone like Jeff Bezos is because he's changed his lifestyle. And he's much more public about the yacht and the girlfriend and the divorce and all these things that have come out from his personal life. Elon, for example, the guy's the richest person in the world, and for some reason, people are standing out trying to get him $50 billion more of a pay package.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he stayed true to what he actually believes in, and he hasn't changed the narrative. And so this is why, like, whether it be, work, like, for example, I'll just use this example. I'll use myself, actually. I was going to use someone else. I'll use myself. I'll see if this works. So, like, my brand is very associated with, like, work hard. And if you hate being poor, you work your way out of it for 10 years. If I ever change this would be like, hey, chill out, just do what you love, do your passion, do your side project. You can get rich very quickly. I started talking about Bitcoin. Like, if that became my narrative, everyone would immediately start to do what you just said. It's like, Mike's made the money, and now like I don't want to support these things. But if you stay true to the brand that you've created, I think that's the consistency is what we're looking for in a person. So the reason you have a friend and the reason that we would consider that person high value in our network is because the consistency of that relationship. And so if that changes for the negative, because you have changes like to your point about Mark, that like Mark Zuckerberg, that like are positive changes. But if that's a negative change, for example, they start to become disassociated. They start doing things that are salacious. They start getting in the news for the wrong reasons. If they start to change what their message has always been, it can become a very negative thing, and then we flip flop on them. So, for example, if Elon stopped working as many hours as he did, I think he'd have a lot of less people willing to support a billionaire. Most of the time when you see a billionaire, everyone wants to shoot them down, but it's because of the way they live. And so when we see them being very frivolous with their spending, it's very easy to start pointing guns at them. And so there's several people I know that have made a lot of money and they will not share with anyone. And the reason for that is because they want to protect their brand from guns start being turned towards them. And so there's this fine balance, and it's funny, as you're going up the tree. So for example, you're trying to build your personal brand. Many times you're actually using for proof, you're using numbers, you're using how much money you're making, I talk about how many locations, how much revenue Augusta Nation does. People talk about their buyouts when they got MERS, they sold an X amount of business. We do that on the way up. And then once you get there, you go the opposite. It's just like when you start a business. When you're first getting started, you're trying to appear big. You're trying to like, hey, we can take care of you. We're professional. And then you get big. You're like, we're personable, and we're going to take your call. It's very important to us, and we're a very local company. And you share pictures of your family on your website. So like it's the same thing in personal brand because most of the time, to your point, when someone gets big, everyone kind of points guns towards them, and now we don't want to support them. But if you look at Elon, the opposite is true. The richest person in the world. And people will still are fighting for him to make $50 billion as a pay package and a bonus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So either way, the sentiment to capitalism is negative if it's used in a way to flaunt or show that you have more than the consumer or the person that is viewing the content. It's the message behind really your personal brand. Right now, kind of blurring the line. Like the personal brand, to summarize what you're saying, can't change. Personal brand must stay consistent. The core values, if you will, needs to be what you've always advertised in order for people to be supportive when you're either making little money to making lots of money. So I think that's an interesting concept. And I like how you said, like, even in business, it's almost like flipped. Like you want to be seen as the big professional, like we've been doing this for a long time. And then when you are big, you almost want to be seen as the opposite. Hey, we're still local. Hey, we still answer our phone. Hey, we're still, happy to be part of this community, whatever it is. It's a very interesting switch. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have many more thoughts on that. All that's to say from this article from Prof. Cheap, Professor Scott Galloway and his co-host Ed, that we are becoming a much more lonely society, and it's all thanks to social media influencers like yourself and like myself now, Mike. So let's give ourselves a round of applause.
I think the article would be better serving the audience if it told us how to deal with these things and cope with these things and reverse it if you saw this as a problem, instead of just identifying the problem, which is never going to be reversed. We're not having less screens. We're not going to be less on social media. More and more of our time and attention will go towards these things. So if you have a problem with it, or if you see this as a negative, how do I deal with it? And like that's what I feel like it would serve the audience better. It won't get as many clicks, but like telling someone to join a church, or maybe don't work virtually and remotely. Get inside of an office. Do it in an area where there's an open workspace so you can meet more people. Go out to events that you can donate your time and volunteer for community stuff. So there are plenty of options.
Yeah. So that's it. I mean, yeah, I know Scott Galloway does talk about that. Simon Sinek talks about it, but I know Scott has really pushed, one of his things that he's very outspoken about is like the rise in loneliness in young men. And he does address this in podcasts and seminars and things of that nature. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I definitely recommend looking up Scott Galloway. I would say for most of our audience, he probably doesn't align with you politically, but he is on a mission to support young men and people that are feeling lost or lonely in the world. And I think that's good. That's a virtuous thing to do, whether you agree with his political ideologies or not. If he's saying like young men are not okay and they're hurting themselves and they need support, that is a good mission to try and fix and to try and solve. So look up that for more information. I just thought it was interesting because you are really building a brand around yourself. Like it is Mike Andes in a yellow shirt on all the videos, on everything that you see online, but it's Augusta, it's Copilots, this, that, or the other. But the brand association that you want for the consumer is Mike Andes. Is that correct?
I really don't care the brand association as long as the owners at Augusta get more money, we're okay. But I don't think it's a strategic thing. It's a matter of like I think the brands that elevate and admonish each other, like they lift each other up. And so whether it be the personal brand elevating the companies, but there's times where the company has to elevate my brand because like there's ebbs and flows of like which one's stronger. And so, for example, the product strength of say Tesla and the FSD can buoy the problems that Elon will have consistently with PR. And then vice versa. There'll be times where there's a big blow up and accidents happening and bad things happening with Tesla, but like because of Elon Musk can get in there and buoy the brand, it gives more protection as well. So I don't think it's like I need people to know about Mike Andes. I could care less.
Yeah. Well, it's not that you need people to know about Mike Andes. I can speak to that as having known you for a few years. But it's like the association of like, this is all kind of under the Mike Andes brand. Like you've said, you want to be potentially like a Dave Ramsey to small business. Like I couldn't tell you anything about Dave Ramsey's branding, but I could tell you Dave Ramsey with a goat and a Southern accent, or a goatee and a Southern accent and like a University of Tennessee football helmet. Like that is the brand, right? That's Dave Ramsey. I couldn't tell you anything about what his logo looks like. Nothing. Like, I don't know. It's it like a D or an R? I don't know. Doesn't matter. But I know Dave Ramsey, right? So, anyways, that is the pod for the day. Any not financial advice for the people?
Take it away.
All right. So, since I have been on a recent health kick, if you will, really trying to focus on sustainable, healthy habits, I have a health hack for anyone out there. So, if you're looking for a cheap, low calorie, but high protein option, Chick-fil-A, you can just get the fillets without the buns or the biscuits.
Mm-hmm.
And for the breakfast fillet, it's a little bit smaller. It's only $2.50. That's the price, $2.50, and it's only 130 calories. So fantastic. Yeah, so I got like 3 of those. That was my breakfast. That was it. Just
Grilled?
like that's
Is
it.
it
No
grilled
bun.
or fried?
I got the spicy one, so there's a little bit of breading just to have that extra flavor. But you can get the grilled, and that drops at I think like 30 more calories. But I wanted the spicy just because their spicy chicken fillet is fantastic. So there you go. That's what I'm finding, like the hacks. Like that's the balance. Like I want it to be sustainable. It's like I like spice, so I'm going to get the spicy thing. It's like, oh no, it's 30 calories more. Well, in the past, I would have gotten the whole sandwich with the bun and probably eaten 2 of them. So now I'm just going to eat 3 patties instead of the actual like the buns and the sauce and all that. So yeah, that's my new hack.
Okay, my non-financial advice. I'll follow the path of health stuff. So, if you struggle to sleep, or you wake up in the middle of the night and you're just like ready to you're rearing to go after 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and you're like, hey, I need to chill out. Melatonin. So it's a natural substance.
Yeah.
It's not like a drug. Don't go. I didn't do like a big dose, but like definitely like small amounts has helped. Mostly when it's like you wake up at 1, 2 o'clock and you're just like, all right, let's go. You're like, no, the body actually needs more sleep than that. So that's been helpful. I've been doing it for like the last week and a half, 2 weeks. Just when it's like, okay, I haven't slept well for a couple nights. I need to make sure I get one good sleep. So I'm probably going to use it a little bit like going up to conference, because last year I didn't sleep at all the night before, like 0 sleep.
Yeah.
I was just like rearing to go. And so I can't have that happen again. It's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, you and I were in the same boat. I remember talking about that. I got maybe 2 hours of sleep the night before conference last time. I was same boat. I think I was just excited, that nervous energy, ready to go, wanting to start it. One thing I will say to that, it's great non-financial advice. I have supplemented with melatonin before. There are studies. Don't take it every day, because your body does naturally produce it, and it can actually reduce the amount that your body is naturally producing. Like that is what helps your body get into those deeper like REM sleeps. But if you take melatonin every day, your body reduces the production rate. So just be careful. That's what I would recommend. There are studies out there that say that, but I use it every once in a while as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna use it probably up until probably the 3 days lead up to conference. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. Like I don't like taking anything every single day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my non-financial advice.
Beautiful. I love it. Well, that is the pod for the day. Like and subscribe.